I'm Julie Ross.
And I'm Gregory Abbey.
And you're listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie is a longtime parent educator and counselor.
And Greg is an actor, writer, and director, and more importantly, a parent just like you.
Through conversations covering a range of different topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you a few of Julie's tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
Look, nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging, to say the least. With a few skills under our belts, though, we might just be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
Okay, so welcome to episode, I'm not even sure what number we're at, but this is an episode about allowance.
Right.
And allowance is something we discussed on our podcast about family meeting. So if you haven't listened to family meeting yet, that's a great one to listen to. And family meeting is an opportunity about when you might give your kids their allowance at the family meeting.
Right.
And we just thought it was important to maybe expand on this.
Sure.
And so I guess just to start, I mean, because, allowance has been one of those things that every family has kind of dealt with and used. And I guess, how do you view it in terms of allowance? Do you think it's important to give your child an allowance?
Well, I think it's important to teach your child about financial responsibility. So some people don't believe in giving allowances at all. They believe that children should earn their money eventually, and that everything else kind of falls under the category of things they have to do around the house in terms of responsibilities.
That they should just do regardless, kind of, you mean?
Exactly. So I personally believe that there's kind of a division of things in the family. There's certainly things that your children should be taken care of, that they should be responsible for their individual responsibilities in the house, that they should have responsibilities to the family as a whole, like to keep common areas clean, this kind of thing.
But that's not connected, because this is what you've sort of talked about in the past. So that's not necessarily connected to money. Like,
right.
You shouldn't get an allowance. Tell me if this is what your kind of point of view is that you don't feel you get an allowance for doing things that should just be part of living in a family, in a home with a family.
Precisely. I think that there's still an opportunity to teach your children financial responsibility through allowance, but I don't believe in giving allowance for chores.
Okay.
Because I think they need to learn that as a member of a family, they're part of a team, and that they have to contribute. They have to empty the dishwasher. They have to take out the trash. They have to feed the dog or the cat.
And that's just a value. It's not connected to money. Because a million families have done that. Why do you say that? So if you say, so many families have done like, okay, you have to unload the dishwasher and do this, and then you get paid. But you're saying
right.
It's not that you don't give the child some money to manage, but it's not necessarily connected to a specific chore.
Right. I consider it's a separate thing to do, so that they not only learn the responsibility of household tasks, but separately they learn this idea of financial responsibility. One of the things that I find is that when parents pay their children to do chores, make their bed, take out the trash, blah, 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 when they pay their children to do these chores, inevitably what happens is that the child says, well, that's not really a lot of money, so why I'd rather not get the money and not do the chores. Chore. Right.
So you're saying if you don't make it a choice, like, this isn't connected to money, you have to do things as part of our family. This is just what you have to do.
Correct. And then there are consequences if they don't take care of their responsibilities in the family. But that's separate and apart from teaching them financial responsibility through giving them allowance.
Right. So you might get a consequence for not picking up your room for a week, but your point is that you're not going to say, like, you don't get the $5 this week.
Right, exactly. Because they won't care.
Well, and they also then lose the opportunity to manage the money, I guess.
Correct. Exactly. And I firmly believe that it's our responsibility as parents to teach our children to manage their money, to learn how to budget, to learn how to save, to learn how to give away to those who are less fortunate.
And what age do you think it's important or okay to start introducing this concept?
I think by about the age of 6. Generally, prior to that age, money doesn't really have a lot of meaning. It's a plaything. So if you give your child an allowance prior to age 6, they're likely to just lose it or leave it lying around the house. But one of the things that often happens at age 6 in the school system is that they begin teaching the value of currency. So they begin to learn 2 nickels equals 1 dime. And it's a way of kind of dealing with fractions.
Mm-hmm.
So they're learning about it in school and reinforcing that at home by actually giving them an allowance and having them learn to count the money and having them learn to portion it out into savings versus giving away versus go spend right now at CVS.
Right.
It reinforces the school process.
Well, that, and I think what you talk about often is also, as I'm listening to you talk, is that you're immediately at a very young age and starting to impart a value.
Yes.
Your value around money. And so you're
Yes.
sort of teaching these ideas. And I also really like this idea that I think is complicated because I know that we didn't always do this. I really like this idea of separating the chores from the money. So when you start introducing this idea of money that, you're going to get this allowance every week, but these things that you do are just what we do in our family as a person who lives here.
Exactly. Because let's face it, when they get older and they have a roommate in college or they have, a partner or they are living in a situation with roommates, when they become adults, they're going to have to be part of that chore process.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have to learn to clean the bathroom. They're going to have to learn to...
And they're not going to get paid for it.
And they're not going to get paid for it, right? And the roommates are going to get kind of angry if they haven't done what they're supposed to do. If the bathroom is disgusting and it's their job that week or that month to do the bathroom, the roommates aren't going to be like, oh, I get it. You had a lot of work on your hands. So no worries. We'll do your work for you.
No. Those days are gone.
Exactly.
So if you have a 6-year-old, how do you determine the amount? Like, is an example, like if the child wants to get ice cream, I mean, I guess it's got to be, you also talk about, there's not really rigidity around this,
right.
But how do you determine a value at that age? And how do you use it with like a 6-year-old?
Well, and I tell parents to think about this all the way through, Greg. The idea is that allowance should be money that you would spend on your child anyway, but you are giving it to them to manage.
Right. And I think you probably have to get a sense of that, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to talk about like, well, how, and again, like all of the other things we talk about, like you really have to take some time to do this because I know I fall in the habit with my kids. It's like you kind of hand them a couple bucks here and a couple bucks there,
right.
Which I guess is okay once in a while, but then that just feels very loose, right?
Yeah, I think it's too loose. I think the goal is when you first sit down to think about how much to give your child, whether you're starting it at age 6 or whether you're starting it later, you need to think about what do I buy for them, let's say on a weekly basis,
mm-hmm.
that they could potentially have the pocket money to carry around and buy for themselves. So you brought up ice cream. That's a great, the ice cream truck, which goes around neighborhoods, which is ubiquitous on the streets of New York in the summer. Maybe that's a thing that you do one day after school is
so you work that in.
Yeah. So you say, okay, how much is an ice cream? I don't even know these days, but let's just say it's
a couple bucks, I think.
Couple bucks.
Right. I've got a child that will be hitting the ice cream truck every day if she can. So I know the prices. So it's a couple bucks for an ice cream.
Right. And for a child who's 6, that's probably enough.
Right.
And the way you introduce it is you say to a 6-year-old, you know what? We're going to give you enough money for you to buy yourself an ice cream once a week.
Mm.
And we're going to add to that, and we're going to give you 50 cents more, let's say, it could be anything, but 50 cents more for you to put in savings.
Mm.
And then we're going to give you 50 cents more to give away to the charity of your choice.
So I think this is great. I mean, I think there were a few years when we were doing family meeting with our 3 kids. We actually had a jar at the meeting.
Right.
That was for contributions, and we tried to do that. I don't know if we were great about the savings part, but we did always give a little extra, and then everyone would put it into a jar. And then at a certain point, we did have a few $100s that then I don't remember what we contributed it to, maybe a homeless shelter or something, but it was a great opportunity. You're showing, the kids the value of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how you sort of split it up even at that young age. You're sort of imparting, this is the money you can spend. It's important to save. It's also important, if you can, to contribute.
Yeah. I mean, look, some parents find that 3-part system a little too complicated. It's like,
Right.
well, what are they saving for?
Right.
At age
Or a lot
6
to
or
manage,
whatever.
I guess, maybe.
Or maybe a lot to manage. I don't know. Some parents just find it too complicated. So I'm always about flexibility here, right? So even if you just do the allowance that they get to spend each week if they choose, right? And I do think the charity is really critical to learn to give back and to not assume that all this money is yours, greedy. So even if you just do the 2-parter, I think that that's fine. I think kids can learn from that. It's as each member of the family puts into the charity, you're seeing money grow in the way you would if you were savings for yourself.
Yeah, but I would imagine if you even just introduce the idea to them to say, like, the idea of saving, that they can on their own if they want to put some aside, especially if, and I'm sure this switches from, this grows over ages, and we can talk about how maybe it shifts, but what about when it's like, the stuff is so complicated. What about when it's like a big item that they want?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times it's based around birthdays. I know my kids are like, I'm going to wait the 5 months for the birthday. Like, how do you do it if, like, they really want something big? And even if you can afford to get it for them, how do you make that determination?
It's really personal choice.
Right.
It comes down to that. But a way to do that is, let's say that your child wants the latest Pokemon card. And that may be a bad example because there's some sort of like fighting going on over Pokemon cards or something.
Yes, but that card is good, or a new video game they want, or a $200 pair of AirPods, which I'm fighting against right now.
Right, exactly. So that child can then choose to save the money, to save their allowance, which is, if we're talking about a 6-year-old, it's $2 a week. They can save their allowance to purchase that by foregoing the ice cream. Now, obviously, a child's not going to get up to a $200 iPod, but neither is a 6-year-old necessarily going to want a $200 iPod.
Yeah, I'm thinking more of like a teenager maybe wanting that.
Yeah. And so there's a number of ways to work that. So when our daughter was a junior in high school, she wanted to do a summer discovery program, which is one of those opportunities where you can go and be on a college campus and get college credits, but also it's, kind of camp for the older set. And we said, well, how do you want to manage that financially? And she said, well, we knew what the total cost was. She looked at that. She said, well, how about this? And we countered with, well, how about this? And we came up with a compromise. So we paid a percentage of it. Mm-hmm. She took part of her savings and contributed toward that. She also asked for gifts from the family for, I think it was Christmas that year, for Christmas, so that she would be able to, that was the only thing she wanted.
So she sort of made it clear, like, this is what I'm trying to do. In lieu of gifts, please give me a contribution towards this thing I want to do.
Precisely. And if you think about it, Greg, that teaches something. It teaches something about, I'm willing to give up X in order to get Y. I'm willing to give up the immediacy of a Christmas gift or I forget what she was into at that time, but, a new recording by her favorite musical artist or what. I'm willing to give up that and have the money go toward a summer plan, which was delayed, obviously by 6 months. So there's a lot of learning that goes in that.
Right.
And it's a lot of the same things that we as adults do I don't want to say naturally, most of us learned it along the way, but we think to ourselves, well, could I go and, spend $200 on a new pair of sneakers?
Yeah,
Or
what am I going to have to give up to do that?
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, I also love, you mentioned that it's really a personal choice, because as you're talking about it too, it sounds like another important part of it is partners have to get on board, right, with how they feel about it, which, listen to our 2 episodes on couplehood. I mean, that seems
Right.
like part of it too, is like, it's probably individualized for, each situation, probably each, parental unit. And so you can have some flexibility around that. So it reminded me, my son wanted like the new iPhone, and he didn't really need it. And we worked out a system, I think at the time, because it was very expensive. I think we ended up paying it up front, and then he ended up paying $50 a month towards paying it off.
Right.
I will say that was a lot to keep. It got difficult because you also have to stay on top of that and keep track of it. But I guess is your point that, you can have some flexibility around how you deal with it, how you deal with those situations.
Sure, absolutely. I try to remind parents of young children or younger children, especially, and maybe even up to the high school age, that it's generally not a good idea to either lend your child money and then require that they pay you back, or to do a system like you did. I don't know how old your son was.
It did fall apart, I will say. It fell apart.
Yeah. And the problem is that children conveniently forget what they've agreed to. They see their money as their money, and I already have the object I wanted, so why do I have to now
it's getting
give
clear
back?
why this did not work at all. I think we made it halfway through. I still sort of kid him about it. And I'm like, I think you still owe us like $300 for that phone. Because that is what happened. Because he wasn't like, okay, I'm sending you the $50. I mean, I guess what I could have done too is to put some sort of consequence around that too, because that's what ended up happening is I was managing it and remembering it and reminding him like, you owe us the 50. And it got to be too much work. And now, as you explain it, I understand why. That was terrible. But what would you?
Well, it's just too complicated.
It was very complicated. It was a lot to manage.
Mm-hmm.
And so, is the answer though then in that situation like, sorry, you can't get the phone?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly one.
Do you have? What is your? How do you think this is going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think one solution is to say you're going to have to delay gratification and wait to get the phone until you save the money. Or you could say you have to save a percentage of the money before you can get the phone. Or you can take the money directly out of their allowance.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, presumably by the time your son was asking for this, he was getting enough of an allowance to be able to pay back $50 a month.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think he was working at the time too, but it just became too much. We couldn't keep track of it.
It is
because it was
much.
Also that would have been like over a year. You know what I mean?
Right.
To do it.
Right. I mean, similar to the situation that my daughter was in, where she wanted to do this summer discovery trip. And we wanted her to pay for part of it. If other people had not contributed, what we would have said is, we will pay a percentage of it. And then you have to have, by the deadline for that, turning in the paperwork, you have to have your percentage available. And quite honestly, we would have made that manageable for her.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's face it, $50 for a 17-year-old is a heck of a lot more than $50 for a 50-something-year-old.
Sure.
So I think parents can think in terms of percentages. You can also give your kids opportunities to earn money.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I mean, I guess that's okay too, right? If they're saying to you, like, which I'm sure is classic and millions of kids have done this, like, I need to earn $20. What can I do? That it's okay to say like, all right, you have to, whatever it is, paint the house,
right?
Clean the floors.
When I was growing up, it was wash the car.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right? I
Yeah.
mean, I didn't get paid $20 for
Right,
it. I think I
right.
got paid $5 for it.
Sure.
But, that was 100 years ago. Yeah, any chore that your child is not usually required to do as part of their normal responsibilities, completely appropriate to say, listen, clean out this closet or help me clean out this closet and I'll pay you $10 for it. And
Sure.
then you can earn extra money. Or the perennial lemonade stand. I mean, that's a classic. And even here in New York City, in the summer, I mean, pre-pandemic, you would walk down the street and there would be kids selling lemonade.
Sure.
For a while, they were selling slime.
Yes, that was a big one. Yeah, kids get inventive. My son fell into selling shoes online. There was a whole underground market for that. So I guess part of it too is helping them investigate. Like, all right, you want $1,000 phone? Like, how are you going to get there?
Exactly.
And I know it changes over age. So if you're at 6, is that maybe once a week you're giving them their 50 cents or their $2 or whatever it is?
I would pretty much, let me think about this. I would pretty much give them their allowance per week.
Right.
Now, it's gotten a little bit more complicated as new ways for kids to access money have come into being.
Yes,
So,
it's definitely gotten trickier. I mean, I know with even my kids, I still think you can't get a bank card until you're 13, right?
correct. I think that's right.
Because that made it a little easier to manage. So if my 15-year-old has a bank card, I can put a certain amount of money in her account, even just by transferring it in, so she knows that's the money I have. Where with the 12-year-old can't do that. So then it's like you're handing them cash for the week and they're figuring it out, I guess.
Yeah, I think, let's just go back to the idea of the bank card first. There are advantages and disadvantages to that because they're not actually seeing the cash. Right?
Yeah.
So, $10 is not represented by 10 separate bills. It's much more.
No. It's ethereal almost because you're right.
Yeah.
They don't see it. And this is when it gets tricky, and I think you have to work pretty hard because I think you're right. It doesn't have as much meaning as opposed to you giving them the $20 and either them using that or even them going to the bank. Like we did that a few times too to make a deposit. You know what I mean? So then it becomes more visceral for them.
Exactly. Even a checking account.
Right.
Even a faux checking account, a fake checking account. So back when my kids were young, they had something called Parent Bank. And it was essentially a checkbook that you would sit down and enter the child's allowance in. You were essentially the bank. And you would essentially put that down. They would add it up. If they wanted to get money from you, they had to actually write a check, give it to you. You would give them the money out of their parent bank, right? That's pretty good too. Again, the problem with the card is it's too amorphous in some way. That being said, the advantage to having a card is that as parents, you can really keep track of everything your child is spending from that.
Yeah, and the convenience of it for sure.
Yeah, and you'll see a statement that they went to the tobacco shop.
Right.
And you go, what's at the tobacco shop for $60? I wonder.
Right.
Could it be a vape pen? So there are advantages and disadvantages. When kids are younger, though, I think it's really important that you go ahead and give them cash on a weekly basis and have kind of, either a jar or a piggy bank or something that they can put their cash into so that they can see it.
Right, and feel it.
And feel it. And think ahead about, listen, I'm going to school today. I know that, it's Tuesday. Tuesday, we usually get the ice cream after school. I better bring my money with me to school.
Right.
And I've had parents say, but what if they lose the money? That's a good learning experience. Let me tell you, from the point of view of being a parent and having had that happen to my kids, it's painful. It's painful because that $2 or whatever it is so meaningful to them. And it's just,
I'm such a pushover.
You.
Oh, no. I know I would totally break and give it, but I also understand why you're saying, don't do that.
Don't do it.
Yeah, because it just teaches responsibility. Or you've even talked about if they spent their money for the week
Yes.
and they really, want something, and you can say, you'll have to wait till next week, as opposed to
Yeah.
giving over and saying, it's okay. Here's a couple extra bucks, or,
Yeah.
you can pay me back.
Right.
I mean, you can do it, but then you're not teaching that sort of value or lesson, right?
Exactly.
Which plays out, I would imagine, years later. What I'm learning as we're continuing to do this is these sort of values you're building at even a very young age sort of play out over time as you build these experiences.
Yeah.
So for a 22-year-old kid who has a credit card, like if he's had that experience of like running out of money, not having the money, they hopefully won't run into that when they're 22 and run up a $5,000 credit card bill. Is that the idea?
That's exactly what we're trying to ward off.
Okay.
Because
So all of this is about down the road stuff. I mean, not all of it, but a lot of it is.
Yeah. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, I would say they're learning the skills in a fairly risk-free environment when it's about ice cream, as opposed to when it's about a $5,000 or $10,000 credit line.
So that's so key. I think that's the key to it, is that it's low risk. So you're starting, because it's not a lot of money either.
Right.
And hopefully you're kind of learning these ideas, if you can start it young, that sort of build over time.
Right, exactly. Because the first thing that's going to happen to parents when their kid graduates from high school is that there's going to be a flood of
credit card offers. And
the kid's like, oh, I know how this works. And they'll sign up. And, in addition to the debt that they are in after school, paying for school, it's mind-boggling that some of these kids get into more debt because they simply don't understand how the whole thing works.
How does it expand then over time as the child gets older? I imagine it just shifts in terms of, the amount that you're giving them. I imagine the frequency changes, because you've talked about, I think, maybe as you get older, maybe then they're working on it's a monthly budget or a biweekly budget. Like teens or even older teens, like is there obviously there's a difference from when they're 6. So what are some of the shifts that you and your partner talk about?
Yeah, sure. It could be a monthly budget. It could be a seasonal budget. They get something for the fall, they get something for the winter, they get something for spring and summer. A lot of that depends upon how your child thinks, whether or not they're kind of capable of keeping track.
So I guess it can be individualized, because I'm thinking about my own 3 children that are actually very different in how they manage their lives.
Sure.
So you can sort of make it particular, even if there's some gray area there.
Right, exactly. And it depends also on what you're going to include as items that are necessary for them to spend out of their budget. So, for example, when my daughter was about 16 or so, we began giving her a clothing budget. So that was seasonal. So we shifted the whole thing to a seasonal budget. And we sat down and we talked about line items, how often she wanted to eat lunch, outside of school on, at a pizza place. We talked about self-care products like shampoo and conditioner and how much that would cost. We talked about clothing items, how much she felt and we felt were needed for the season, et cetera, et cetera. And she happily took that all on. It was negotiable over time. So, at first it's an experiment. You're like, is this really what you're going to need? Going back to our family meetings, if you're having family meetings, that you can check in and see how it's going. My son, a whole different story, because if we had given them a clothing budget, they wouldn't have cared. I mean, they didn't, right back then, they didn't spend money on clothing. So that would have just accrued over time. And
they didn't get a clothing budget because you knew because they weren't going to use it.
They weren't going to use it.
Right.
They were going to be like, they would have spent that money on other things. And, I don't know what. I try not to think about that, but it was less than what kids can spend it on now. But we wanted to make sure that we made them responsible for things they cared about, because otherwise they would take it and spend it irresponsibly. So in other words, let's put it in today's terms. Back then, there wasn't vaping. There was certainly cannabis use and that kind of thing, but there wasn't vaping. So if you give a child $250 for clothing, which is really a low amount today, often, but they don't care about clothes, and they're perfectly willing to wear the socks that have the holes in them and the ratty underwear and the jeans that are all ripped up that they didn't pay to get ripped up. They're going to have $250 and they're going to go spend it on vape.
Right.
Or getting someone to buy them alcohol, or, this is in the adolescent years. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about each child as an individual. Now, when my son got to college, everything shifted. Then we were giving them, a clothing allowance. We were giving them a budget to eat outside of the dorms. We were giving them money to spend on toiletries, because at that level, they almost had to care about it. We were far away. We couldn't.
Sure. I mean, it really sounds like it obviously depends on the circumstance. But as you're talking, and as it seems in like so many of the things that we talk about, is that it has to be like an ongoing communication and a check-in. It's not a one-size-fits-all. There's got to be some flexibility. I mean, as you're talking... And we don't always do that. The check-in enough.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. Our son is, one of the things we're starting to grapple with, or I'm starting to think about, is our son is going to live off campus this year at college.
Right.
So that's one of the things we have to talk about. So there's an allowance for food because he was on a meal plan at school. So we're going to give him allowance for food. What is that? But like, are we paying for him when he wants to go out with his friends and have a beer? No. He's worked in the past over the summer to make money for spending money, and we tried to delineate that. This past year has been tricky because of the pandemic, so he really hasn't had to work. Yeah. It's just as you're talking, I'm like,
it's very complicated.
Okay, we really have to go through all of these things and include him on the conversation,
Yes. And that's part of the point in general when we talk about parenting is we have to think about it as parents. We can't just blindly kind of bludgeon our way through if we want to raise responsible adults who are independent. We have to think about it. We have to put the time in to think about it. So that does involve thinking about, well, how much is reasonable to spend on food? And you think in terms of, well, if he buys groceries, right?
Not this kid, but okay.
Right. But if he buys groceries, he can make a budget go up for food go further.
Well, and that's just another conversation because he's a kid that we're in the city. He orders out a lot, but that's more expensive. And, so those are the sorts of questions you can start to grapple with as they get older because it's just going to shift. Even like, he's a college student, but when they're in high school, and I guess that's your point is like, as this evolves over time from 6 until, college age, what are some of the things we're sort of covering them, I guess, in terms of how you adjust as you go along? It's more responsibility. It's more money. It might be a longer time in terms of how, they get the money for the month as opposed to per week.
Right.
Is that the sort of ideas that shift?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of it too is as your kids get older, the goal, I guess I would say, or the pitfall, there's a pitfall because they're going to come up short. And the goal is to not bail them out. I've seen it happen where a kid gets bailed out. They lose their job, right? So we're talking past late adolescence, past allowances. They lose their job and they're like, oh no, now I can't make my car payment. Mom, Dad, will you help me out this month? And Mom and Dad go, oh, sweetheart, that's a shame that you lost your job. It wasn't your fault. Of course, we'll help you out this month. But I've seen over and over and over and over again how that can repeat itself. And basically you wind up with a kid who isn't taking responsibility for holding on to a job, isn't taking responsibility for cooking instead of eating out, who isn't taking responsibility for those things, who isn't taking responsibility to save their money for emergencies.
So how do you find the line between helping and enabling?
Oh, so hard.
Right.
As a parent myself, Greg, I would say I grappled with it. I haven't had to do it in a while. I grappled with it pretty much every time it came up with each of my kids.
I mean, I think it's just a tough thing. I brought it up with my wife the other night about one of our children, and I said, I'm like, I don't think we're helping one of our children in this area. I think now this is enabling, not supporting.
Exactly.
And so I guess I imagine you just have to kind of keep re-examining that line, because as you're talking, it's like, if a child lost his job, and it probably depends on the child, because you might have to teach a lesson if this is a child that is taken advantage or hasn't found the responsibility, but it might be a child that's like, I want to figure out a system to pay you guys back. I just need help this month. So it just seems it's probably something you have to re-examine all the time, because we are. It's like, are you are you helping? Are you supporting? You don't want them to be in trouble, but you don't want to enable them that they never learn a lesson. Is that the idea?
Right, exactly. Kids who are enabled, it's an easy life for them. Mm-hmm. They continue to be irresponsible around money because they know mom and dad will bail them out until mom and dad aren't here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then what are they, are they grifting from person to person? I mean, my personal experience with that is, yes, that's exactly what happens, is that they continue to cry, poor me, life isn't fair, can you help me out, it's a one-time thing, et cetera, et cetera. So think about it this way. Think about how much easier it is to teach these lessons when they're 6 years old. It's ice cream. They're crying because they spent their $2.
Right. Their nickel that would have gotten them the gumball at the grocery store, they've already spent. And
so
you can say, I'm sorry, but next week you'll have your allowance back. And you got 2 gumballs on Monday, remember?
Right.
Instead of 1.
They're not tugging at your heartstrings for a car payment.
Right.
Or, gas money or rent. I mean, those are big ticket items.
Yeah.
And look, Greg, I've had a lot of parents say, but we can afford to give this to our kids.
Sure.
We didn't have it when we were young. We want to be generous with our kids.
Yep, I understand that.
And me too. And my argument is always, that may be your desire, but what are you teaching your child about being independent as they move forward?
Right.
You're teaching them to depend on you or to depend on someone instead of thinking for themselves.
Right, because then there's a whole psychological, emotional component when you are living that way, right? And not gaining your independence, your self-sufficiency to kind of do it on your own.
Right. I mean, essentially, as parents, you're infantilizing your children. You're keeping them babies.
Right.
Or 6-year-olds who only have $2 a week to spend on ice cream, but you're, supplement. It's not fair to them in the long run. And I'm not a proponent necessarily of the school of hard knocks, where everything should be a struggle. And I do think parents should have some flexibility around some of this stuff. As your child grows, they're not going to see, they're coming home on a plane and they have got more luggage and they have to pay for extra luggage. They're not necessarily going to foresee all of these situations. And so there will be times that you say, you know what, I'm going to give you the money and we'll arrange to get it paid back, which they're a little bit more capable of doing once they're after adolescence. But the trick is to not make it an every time thing. To say, this is something you need to think about for the future. You need to have an emergency fund.
Right.
Because...
So if they get stuck once in that situation, you might help them out. That's your point. But that's not something you want to do repeatedly, because it's never going to change.
Exactly. Yeah. And arrange ahead of time for a schedule of payment, a schedule of repayment.
So as we head into the end of this, can we just touch on how much should parents, a couple, share with their children about their own finances? Like, how do you determine that when they're like, why can't we go, Sally went to Disneyland for 2 weeks. Why can't we do that? Like,
right.
I imagine it's like maybe you're not sharing specifics, like you're not necessarily talking about like how much you make each year. I don't know. How do you make those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like kids shouldn't need to worry about the amount that their parents make. I think it's more about imparting to your kids that as adults, you make particular choices, that the amount of money is limited. And look, if you're a parent whose money is unlimited, still think in terms of limited.
Mm-hmm.
Don't say, well, we have unlimited money. You may, have billions of dollars a year. I don't know. But that's not going to be helpful to your kids. Think in terms of a limited amount of money and say, look, we have a limited amount of money. We choose to spend our money on nights out at a restaurant from time to time instead of an Uber to get you from here to your friend's house. Or we choose to put our money into a family vacation every year rather than spend it on
Getting bubble tea twice a day.
exactly getting bubble tea twice a day. So it's about talking to them about the choices that you make with money
and your values, as opposed to dollar, like this is what we pay, this is what the mortgage is, and why we can't afford it.
Right. I mean, that's over the heads of most kids.
When they just don't need that.
And they don't need that information. When we give them the idea of aligning the choices that we make with our money, the things that we choose to make or to spend our money on, with our values, that's a very important concept. So you might even say, look, we had to have our home repaired because, the lighting wasn't up to code.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to spend X amount of dollars, or you don't even have to say X amount of dollars.
Right.
You can say X amount, but
sure,
you shouldn't say the amount. We had to spend a certain amount of money on that. And that means that we're going to take a shorter vacation this year.
Sure.
Or that means that, we're going to cut back on taxi rides or whatever it might be.
Yeah. So it seems like it's really, again, about imparting your values to your children. That's what you're basically doing, is you're through these sort of discussions that don't necessarily have to be like, this is the kitchen costs
Right.
10 grand, or we only make 150 grand a year. It's more about like, these are the choices we make. This is what I feel like you're saying, is that you're sharing these are the choices we've had to make to impart your values about how you handle money.
Right. I think, I've heard both sides of this spectrum, the parents who have enough to support their children for the rest of their children's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also heard from the other side,
where it's a struggle.
It's a struggle, and parents are just trying to survive and put food on the table for everybody. And
there's probably a lot of want and need and desire coming from the kids too. That's tough.
Exactly. And that's the area where, I would say, you shouldn't have to worry about allowance. In a sense, your kids are kind of getting those lessons because of kind of what the family.
You mean if there's a family that's struggling, they can sort of, and you can probably still have those same sort of conversations that you're talking about as, parents with your kids about whether you can't do allowance, or, I mean, the other thing that's always existed, and it might be even more now, is like keeping up with the Joneses. I mean, we're in the city, New York City, where that's a really, really disparate range of class structure.
Yes.
And one kid lives in a freaking townhouse with an elevator, and the other person's sharing a 1-bedroom apartment.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's probably part of the struggle too. And I imagine, again, like then again, it's just a conversation about why you can't do certain things.
Yeah, I mean, I think we keep coming to this idea of conversation, of communication, of keeping these lines of communication open, and giving your child the information that they need and can handle at each developmental stage. So a 6-year-old only has a certain bandwidth to deal with whatever information you're giving them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want, if you don't have a lot of money or you're going through a hard time, you don't want to give that information to a 6-year-old.
Sure.
I mean, unless
sharing
you have
your
to.
emotional, financial struggles.
Right, exactly, because they're not capable of dealing with it.
Sure, and they shouldn't have to.
Right, exactly. I remember when my husband decided to leave corporate America and be an artist full time. And our children were old enough to understand. I'm going to say maybe 10 and 14 at the time.
Right. So obviously there was going to be a shift.
There was going to be a shift.
Mm-hmm.
And they were old enough to understand that the loss of a job, or even if it was a voluntary situation, meant that we would have less income.
Sure.
And my son, I remember my son we said, do you have any questions? And my son said, can I still buy toys?
That's sweet.
I know. And we said, yes.
Absolutely not.
No way. What do you think? We're made of money? We said, yes, you will still be able to buy some toys. And my daughter, who was just, mature beyond her years always, was cutting something out of paper while we were telling them this. And we turned to her and said, do you have any questions? And she had cut letters out of paper and she lined them up and the letters said, follow your dream.
Wow.
So in sharing it, it created family unity.
Mm-hmm.
And at her level, 14 or whatever it was, 13, she was able to kind of synthesize that into, even if I have to make sacrifices, it's okay.
This is a thing Dad's going to follow his dreams.
Exactly.
Well, I also love that you led with what you talk about often. And you just said, do you have any questions?
Yes.
So that's really important too, I think. And also just keeping it, you didn't have to go into like detail about how much money he might be making differently. I mean, I'm thinking even of myself over the last year with the pandemic, like I'm an actor, I do production, like all of that shut down.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like I sat down and burdened them with it, but it changed things because I basically didn't work for 7-8 months because of that. And yeah, that's great. So I think, I know you can't summarize it in like one word or one sentence even, but if we're talking about allowance, if we're talking about money, what are the couple of important things for parents to keep in mind as they kind of start this journey with their kids?
I think probably the most important thing, Greg, is that parents have an ultimate goal in mind, a destination. What do they want for their children at, let's just say, college age? What do they want their children to be able to manage for themselves? And then once we have our destination in mind.
You mean like what values do you want them to have when they kind of go off on their own in terms of finances?
Yeah, values and skills.
Okay.
You know,
Right.
Ability to budget,
Mm-hmm.
create line items, know how to take from one to put in the other, how to save.
How to contribute,
right? So that's your destination, right? And as long as we have the destination in mind, how we get there can be a little piecemeal, because maybe you're starting this when your child's 16. Right? So that you've got 4 years or 3 years or 2 years or whatever until that you have to get to that destination. You're going to pick up the pace.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to say, well, here are the skills we got to teach kind of this week. If you've got a younger child, if you've got a 6-year-old, you still have that same destination in mind. And you think, okay, well, what can we teach this year to this child? And what can they absorb during this time? I feel like generally speaking in parenting, as long as we know what our goal is, what our destination is, then even if we get off track with that, we can get back on track because we can go, not meeting that goal right now. How much do we need to change? How much do we need to shift in order to get there by the time they're college age? Thanks for listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your family and friends. And if you'd like to hear more about Julie's work, join one of her parenting groups, or see about individual counseling, please visit parentinghorizons.com. Or you can email Julie at julie.ross@parentinghorizons.com.
See you next time.